It's strange how some memories never fade, no matter how much time passes. I still remember my first job vividly. I was just a teenager, barely 16 or 17, working at a rundown pizza place that offered slightly better pay than the others. It wasn't glamorous, but the extra cash from delivery tips kept me there. The nights were always the same routine, predictable, nothing worth remembering. At least, that's what I thought. But one night, something happened that I'll never forget. That shift started like any other. I came in around 6 p.m., knowing I'd be there until midnight. For the first few hours, everything felt normal, almost boring. Orders came and went, customers shuffled in and out, and the kitchen buzzed with its usual noises. Nothing stood out. Nothing felt wrong. Yet, looking back now, I wonder if I missed the signs. Because as the clock ticked closer to 10 p.m., the night took a turn I never saw coming. As the evening stretched on, an order came in for delivery. It was a quiet neighborhood, tucked far away from the busy streets. I loaded the pizza and headed out, following the GPS to an address I'd never been to before. The houses were scattered, hidden behind tall trees with driveways that seemed to stretch endlessly into the dark. It took me a while to even find the right house. The trees made it hard to see the address numbers, and I had to circle back a few times before I spotted it. Finally, I found the driveway and turned in. The house stood at the end, old and massive, with a porch that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The air felt heavy, the kind of silence you only hear when you're completely alone. I parked, grabbed the food, and walked up to the porch. That's when I noticed the door was wide open, not just cracked, but fully open. It felt odd, but I told myself people can be careless. I took a deep breath and stepped closer, not knowing that this delivery would haunt me for years. As I approached the open door, I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should knock or just leave the pizza on the porch. Before I could decide, a voice called out from inside the house. "Hey, would you mind bringing the pizza in here? I'm just setting up the table," the voice said. It sounded friendly, normal even. I'd had requests like this before, and though it wasn't ideal, it usually meant a good tip. Still, something about the situation made me uneasy. The house was eerily quiet, and the open door gave me a bad feeling. But I brushed it off. It was just a quick drop-off. Nothing to worry about, right? I stepped inside cautiously, following the voice toward what looked like the kitchen. The hallway was dimly lit, and the air felt heavy. I reached the table, set the pizza down, and looked around. The kitchen was empty. There was no one there. Just as I turned to leave, I heard the voice again. "Can you bring it in here, please?" This time, it came from another hallway connected to the kitchen. I froze for a moment, staring at the direction of the sound. The hallway was dark, and at the end of it was a single open door. Whatever was behind that door was hidden in complete shadow. The voice sounded calm, but there was something off about it now, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It didn't make sense. There was no sound of footsteps, no movement. It was like the voice was just there, right behind the doorway. My gut screamed at me to leave, and for once, I listened. Without looking back, I turned and walked quickly out the front door, feeling my heart race with every step. As soon as I got outside, I didn't stop. I headed straight to my car, trying to stay calm, but my hands were shaking as I opened the door. I started the engine and pulled out of the driveway without looking back. The silence from that house lingered in my mind, and the voice replayed over and over in my head. I drove back to work, my heart pounding the entire way. When I got there, I didn't say a word about what had happened. I didn't want anyone to laugh at me for being scared or think I was making it up. So, I kept it to myself, trying to push the whole thing out of my mind. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right about that house or the person who had called out to me. Looking back now, I can't help but wonder what might have happened if I had stayed a moment longer. There was nothing normal about that house, that voice, or the way the silence pressed down on me like a warning. I've replayed it in my mind so many times, questioning my instincts. But one thing has always been clear: I made the right choice by leaving. Whatever was waiting for me in that dark hallway, it wasn't just an ordinary delivery. Sometimes, the scariest part of a story is what you'll never know, and for me, not knowing is enough. I'm just thankful I trusted my gut that night and got out while I still could. Even now, years later, I still feel uneasy when I think about that night. It's not just the voice or the dark hallway that haunts me, it's the unknown. What if I hadn't left? What if I had stepped into that room? There are so many questions that will never have answers, and maybe that's for the best. One thing I've learned from that experience is to trust your instincts. Sometimes, the small, nagging feeling that something isn't right could be the only thing standing between you and something truly dangerous. That night taught me to listen to that feeling, no matter how small or irrational it seems. It's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. Since that night, I've often wondered about the person in that house. Who were they? What were they doing in the shadows, waiting silently? And why did their voice sound so calm, so calculated? It's the kind of thing that keeps you awake at night, replaying every detail, trying to make sense of it. But no matter how much I think about it, I know I'll never have the answers. The experience changed how I see things. Ordinary situations can turn strange in an instant, and you might not even realize it until it's too late. I was lucky that night, lucky to trust my instincts, and lucky to get out when I did. Some doors, I've learned, are better left unopened. Working late at night always felt peaceful to me. The world outside was quiet, and the only sound was the hum of the kitchen equipment and the occasional rustling as I cleaned up. At 20 years old, I was juggling college and working at my parents' small takeout restaurant. They had given me a simple position to help out when I could. Most nights, it was just me, the cleaning supplies, and the empty restaurant. It wasn't a bad setup. After closing, I'd lock the doors, tidy up, and head home. The job was predictable, uneventful. But as calm as those nights seemed, I had no idea how quickly that routine would shatter. Sometimes, you don't notice the small things that mark the beginning of something bigger, something terrifying. That's exactly how it started, so small. I almost didn't give it a second thought. It was just another night, or so I thought. About an hour into my shift, I noticed a car parked outside. Our restaurant had a small, standalone lot, so it was odd for a car to just sit there with no one coming in. It was an older grey sedan, its windows dark, headlights shining straight at the building. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe someone was waiting for a friend or taking a break. After about 20 minutes, the car drove off, and I went back to my cleaning, pushing the thought to the back of my mind. It felt strange, sure, but I didn't feel worried. Not yet. The next night, things got weirder. Around the same time, the same grey sedan pulled into the parking lot again. This time, it felt different. The car parked in the exact same spot, headlights on, facing the building. It wasn't a coincidence anymore. My heart started to race as I stared at it through the front windows. I tried to focus on my cleaning, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone inside the car was watching me. Every now and then, I glanced out to see if it was still there. After a while, the car left, just like before, but this time, I felt uneasy. It didn't feel random anymore, and I couldn't figure out why they were there. That night, the silence in the empty restaurant felt heavier than usual. The third night, I was on edge before my shift even started. I couldn't stop thinking about that car. As soon as I got to the restaurant, I found myself looking out the windows, expecting to see it parked there again. But hours went by, and nothing happened. No car, no headlights, no reason to feel nervous. By the time I finished cleaning, I had almost convinced myself that I'd overreacted. Maybe it was all just a coincidence, and I was letting my imagination get the best of me. I locked up and stepped outside, feeling a bit of relief. The parking lot was quiet, and everything seemed normal for now. As I walked to my car, that uneasy feeling hit me again. I couldn't explain it, but it was like every nerve in my body was on high alert. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the grey sedan. It was parked in the far corner of the lot, hidden in the shadows where the streetlights didn't reach. Before I could process what was happening, the car's engine roared to life. My heart dropped as it sped toward me, headlights cutting through the darkness. Panic set in, and I froze for a second too long. I knew I had to move, but the fear was paralyzing. It wasn't just a coincidence anymore, this was something much worse. I ran as fast as I could toward my car, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the keys. The sedan screeched to a halt beside me, and I heard the car doors slam open. My heart was pounding, and I didn't dare look back. All I could think about was getting inside and locking the doors. I barely managed to jump in and hit the lock button before the men reached me. Through the windows, I saw them, three figures in masks and hoodies, banging on the glass and trying the handles. My hands shook as I turned the key in the ignition, desperate to get away. The engine roared to life, and I floored the gas pedal, swerving out of the lot as they scrambled to chase after me. The fear was overwhelming, but I knew I couldn't stop. Not yet. As I sped away, I grabbed my phone and called 911, my voice shaky as I explained what had just happened. The operator told me to get to a safe, well-lit place and wait for the police. I pulled into a nearby gas station, my hands still trembling as I parked under the bright lights. My eyes kept darting to the road, terrified that the sedan might come back. When the police arrived, I told them everything. They searched the area but found nothing. Without cameras at the restaurant, there wasn't much evidence for them to go on. The officers assured me they'd keep an eye out, but it wasn't much comfort. That night, the reality of how close I had come to danger sank in, and the fear stayed with me long after I drove home. The office was small and quiet, the kind of place you wouldn't think needed a security guard. But that was my job, sitting alone at night, watching over a building that seemed far too ordinary to hold any real danger. The company was a startup, though I never really knew what they did. My job was simple: turn on the security system, watch the cameras, and make sure everything stayed in order. At first, it felt like the easiest job in the world. No big responsibilities, no real threats, just hours of silence broken only by the occasional hum of the equipment. But as uneventful as it seemed, something about that office always felt off. It was too quiet, like the building itself was holding its breath. I didn't think much of it at first. That is, until one night when the silence was broken by something I couldn't explain. It happened around 1 a.m. I was sitting in the security room, half watching the monitors, when I heard a sharp click, like a latch snapping shut. It was sudden and out of place, loud enough to make me sit up straight. My heart started to race as I stared at the open doorway, trying to figure out where the sound had come from. I got up and stepped into the hallway, expecting to see something obvious. but everything looked normal. The doors were all closed, just as they had been earlier, and the hallway was empty. I told myself it was probably nothing, a random noise from the building settling or my imagination playing tricks on me. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. Something didn't feel right. I decided to check the doors, just to be sure. There were only 3 in the hallway, leading to small office rooms filled with desks and computers. I opened each one, looked around quickly, and found nothing out of the ordinary. Everything was in its place, exactly as it should be. No sign of anyone or anything unusual. Feeling a little foolish, I went back to the security room. This time, I left the door open so I could hear more clearly if it happened again. I sat back down and kept an eye on the monitors, telling myself it was just a random noise. But no matter how hard I tried to shake it off, the uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. Something about that sound didn't sit right with me. 20 minutes passed, and I was starting to feel more at ease. Then I heard it again, a soft, slow creak, like a door being pushed open. My stomach dropped as the sound echoed down the hallway. This wasn't my imagination. Something or someone was in the building. I got up, my hands shaking as I stepped back into the hallway. One of the doors, the one I had just checked earlier, was now slightly open. I stared at it, trying to convince myself that maybe I hadn't closed it all the way. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I had checked it. It had been shut. Something wasn't right, and I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. I stepped closer to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. The room beyond was dark, and the faint light from the hallway barely reached inside. I pushed the door open a little wider, trying to see if anything was out of place. At first, everything looked normal, just rows of desks and office chairs, exactly as they had been earlier. Then, I saw it. A shadow moved across the far wall, faint but unmistakable. My breath caught as I turned my head and spotted him, a man crouched under one of the desks at the back of the room. His face was pale, with dark circles under his eyes, and he was staring right at me. His expression was a strange mix of anger and fear, and I froze for a second, unable to process what I was seeing. Then he started to move. The moment he started to get up, I didn't wait to see what he was going to do. I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing down the hallway as I sprinted for the front door. My heart was racing, and my only thought was to get out of that building as fast as I could. As I pushed through the doors, the security alarm blared behind me, filling the silence with its deafening sound. I didn't stop running until I was a safe distance away, turning back only to see if he was following me. The front doors swung open, and I saw him bolt out of the building, disappearing around the corner into the darkness. My hands were shaking as I called the police, my breath coming in gasps. I had no idea what just happened, but I knew I didn't want to go back inside. The police arrived quickly, and I explained everything, my voice still trembling. They searched the area but didn't find the man. When we checked the security footage, it only added to the mystery. There was no sign of him entering the building. He hadn't come through any of the doors, and the cameras didn't catch anything unusual. The company assured the officers that nothing was missing and claimed they had no idea who the man could be. But something about their reaction felt off, like they weren't telling the whole truth. I couldn't shake the feeling that they knew more than they were saying. That night, as I drove home, I couldn't stop replaying the image of the man's face in my mind. The fear in his eyes wasn't just directed at me, it was like he was scared of something else entirely. After that night, I couldn't see the job the same way. Every shift felt heavier, like the walls were closing in on me. I kept wondering who that man was and why he was there. The company's insistence that nothing was wrong only made me more uneasy. Why did such a small office need a security guard in the first place? It didn't add up. Eventually, I decided I couldn't stay. A few months later, I quit and moved on to a better job. But the memory of that night never left me. The man's expression, the way he seemed both angry and afraid, still haunts me. I'll never know what he was doing there or what he might have been hiding from. Some questions are better left unanswered, but that doesn't make them any less terrifying.